Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers. This month we decided to do a program of political stories. Being originated in the month of November, we thought it most appropriate, that being an election month. So we brought three very prominent political activists to be our guests on the program. I'm pleased to welcome them. First of all, Dr. Bob Bullen, 24-year member of the Rutherford County Commission and a retired professor of MTSU. Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Kent Syler, who worked with Congressman Bart Gordon for 26 plus 3 years, I guess 29 years, now a political science assistant professor at MTSU. Kent, welcome. Good to have you.
Glad to be here.
And finally, Alan Farley, who is administrator of elections for Rutherford County, a longtime political advisor, and more recently active with the BRAA at MTSU and newly appointed elections administrator. Alan, it was your idea. Thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be amongst all this wisdom and history.
Well, we've got it here within all three of you guys, and we're looking forward to hearing stories. What was your original thought as a good political story that might be of interest?
Yeah, just Murfreesboro and Rutherford County has been so blessed over the years, in just recent times, and even back in the mid 1900s, if not before that, of just having an impact on the community. And so, watching one of the shows, I said, that would be a great topic of a lot of people that's moved here in the last 10 years that don't really understand our history, or some of the players who made Murfreesboro and Rutherford County what it is today. And I think that people probably interested in that and want to know that. So I think we got to know where we've been, where we came from, to know where we are and where we're headed. So.
Absolutely. Ken, and you're working with Congressman Gordon those many years. I'm sure you've had a lot of interesting experiences over the time.
There were a lot, and sure. I guess to start us off and with our register of elections here, Alan, we've undergone a transformation in Rutherford County from a solid Democratic county to a fairly solid Republican county. And Congressman Gordon used to tell a story his grandfather would tell back during the days when it was a solid Democratic county out in Christiana. They were counting votes after an election, and they were all coming in, Democrat, Democrat, and everybody's kind of watching, and all of a sudden they get a Republican vote, and everybody no one knows what to do. So they sit and they look around, and Mr. Gordon goes, well, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to count that vote. And so they put it down, then they keep going Democrat, 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 and then suddenly there's another one. And by that time, they don't know what to do. And Mr. Gordon thinks a minute and says, well, it's clear. That scoundrel voted twice. Throw them both out.
Both.
Yeah.
Times have sure changed.
Yeah, times are different.
Bob, your experiences on the county commission, I'm sure.
Well, we're sitting in a wonderful environment here, having redone the courthouse, and the county can be proud of it. But before this was done, we sat sort of in a semicircle, and the people that were here were really right on your back, the ones that could get in here. And so one night, a commissioner from the northern part of the county made a resolution about some zoning, and some of his constituents were here, and they didn't like the resolution at all, and they were giving him a hard time. He got a second from another commissioner, and they were giving him a hard time because they were within inches of him, and they could lean forward and tell him what they thought of him, which wasn't much.
That was about a rock quarry, too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about a rock quarry. I didn't want to mention the guy's name, but anyway, it came time to vote, and they came around, and you voted one at a time going around. We didn't have a scoreboard or anything, and so he voted against his own resolution. And they still didn't like him. They were so mad at him, but the fellow who seconded the motion stayed with the motion, so they got one vote out of it. But it wasn't the guy that made the motion. He changed. The demonstration of that is that when the public's right on your back, they influence you, and you can abandon whatever it is you believe.
Certainly can. And as Bob Bullen mentioned, we're in the Rutherford County Courthouse in the courtroom, and during Bob Bullen's tenure here, it had a lot to do with improving and redesigning and decorating the room to be the wonderful period that it is.
Well, we're proud of it. I'll just leave it at that.
And Dr. Bullen mentioned also the voting board here, where you can do it electronically like you do in any other legislative body, I guess. I know when I was also on the county court, it was called then. We voted by districts, first district right through the 21st. So what we would do from time to time, we would reverse and start with 21 and go reverse. But anybody in the middle could pretty well see how the vote was going and could influence you, could possibly do.
Had the advantage, yeah, the people in the middle have the advantage. I know in Congress, they've got the scoreboard up, and a lot of folks wait until the last minute where they can tell where it's going to be. A lot of times they may not want to vote that way unless they're needed too, so that kind of gives them that ability to do those things.
Well, you could follow the vote around
I'm sure.
and see how it was going, and,
yes.
and I've seen people promise before the meeting to vote a certain way, and then as they saw the vote going, they flipped. And of course, they always had an excuse.
Alan, in your political activities, you've also worked with former Senator Fred Thompson, I believe.
I did, and of course, Senator Thompson was always a big fan of Rutherford County, and I always enjoyed coming here. And we for about 11 years we hosted a clay target shoot. Really, it was started out as a fundraiser for him. Charlton Heston came in, and it was kind of interesting. They had all these different requests, and we really was making sure that we wanted to take care of Mr. Heston. And so he gets there, and at this time they were driving in a van type automobile. They pull up, and we've got people to pay. I think it was like $1,000 to shoot with, Mr. Heston, and then we had some people that just kind of on the rope line that, that gave $50 just hopefully to shake a hand and get a picture. Well, he gets there and he says, he goes, I don't believe I'm going to shoot today. And so my heart starts to miss a beat or two, and so he looks up in the sky, and there's just like the one cloud. I mean, there's not a cloud in the sky, but there's one dark cloud right above us. And he looked at me and he said, it's not going to rain today. He goes, I guarantee it. And I said, Mr. Heston, if you could part the Red Sea, I'm sure you can keep it from raining in Rutherford County. And but yeah, he really enjoyed being a part of that and being a part of Rutherford County, and always enjoyed visiting. Always enjoys coming back even today.
Kent, were there any embarrassing situations you ever got into from a political standpoint with working for Congressman Gordon?
I don't know how embarrassing. There were some funny moments from time to time. We had you always in campaigns have a pretty big variety of people that are pretty interesting, and one of the funnier things that I remember was when we had two really tough races against Steve Gill in 1994 and then in 1996. And Mrs. Gordon worked extremely hard through those things. I mean, she worked and she would raise money, and then when she ran out of anything else to do, she would go work the Kroger parking lot over on South Tennessee and ask people when they pulled in if they could put on a bumper strip. And so she was doing that one day, and the parking lot got a little slow, and this woman that had just pulled in, Ms. Gordon said, can I put this on your card? She said, yeah, we support your son. We just bought a small business here, and we're for him. And so then she goes into the laundromat, which was next to the Kroger. So things get a little slow, and Ms. Gordon thought she would go strike up another conversation with the woman, and she goes into the laundromat and says, my husband and I like to support businesses that support my son. What's the name of your business? And she said, we just bought the Rock Haven Nudist Lodge. And Ms. Gordon said, well, maybe after the election.
Good comeback.
Yeah.
Bob, other experiences on the county commission?
Well, you find out when you run for office at the local level, you have to go out in the neighborhoods and knock on doors and meet people. And so my first time out, I was about my third or fourth day out. I knocked on the door, and this lady answered the door, and she was a very attractive woman, and all she had on was a scanty towel. You could tell that was all she had on. And she said, why don't you come on in? And I thought, well, maybe that's a good idea, but I don't think I better do this. And then I thought, if I want to end my political career before we even have the first election, then I can go in there. And so I decided that I would move on, and I just told the lady, I said, this is my name, and I sure would appreciate your vote. But I moved on to the next door quickly because I was driven to be a county commissioner at that time, and I could see that would have been the end of the trail. if I'd walked in that lady's house.
So you spent 6 terms on the county commission in
Yes,
24
and
years.
anytime anybody answered with a towel, I moved on to the next place.
And that's very common. I mean, I know in some of the campaigns I've been involved in years ago, I mean, you run across a lot of unique situations.
Oh, yes.
When you
And
knock on doors.
I had a very pleasant district to represent, but I had one incident where I was going around and I came up to this guy, and his yard had a wire fence around, and he was sitting in a chair rocking, and I said hello, and he said, "Hey, I know who you are." He said, "Back off." Said, "Don't come on my property." And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, I want you to go. I don't want you to come in here on my property." And then I said, "Well, tell me why." And he called me a few names and told me why. And then finally, I just looked at him and I said, "Well, I guess this means you're not going to vote for me." and I just moved on to the next house. But he really let me have it.
What was your toughest race? Did you have any real close calls in any of your campaigns?
Well, no. The first one was the hardest because I was nervous at doing it. But I discovered that if you go meet people, you've got a good chance because they will say, and you've heard this, you're the first one that's come around to ask me for my vote, and you usually get that when you bother to go. I could walk my district,
Right.
but I think the 4th time I was out there, it was late at night, and I was as far away from my house as I could be, and I had to walk back, and I finished up about 9 o'clock at night, and it must have been 95 or 96 degrees, and the humidity was up, and I stopped at the last house, and then I came out, and I stood out in the street, and the moon was out, and I looked up, and I thought, what in the heck am I doing out here at this? Is this commissioner's job really worth it? And then, being the fact that I enjoyed it, I thought, yes, it is a good job. And I think I'll just walk home and I'll be out here again tomorrow night.
Now, is it true, I heard this rumor, Bob may not tell it on himself, that he went into a convenience store, I don't know if it was in his district or not, but they said some guy looked at him and said, "Excuse me, sir," said, "has anybody told you look like Bob Bullen?" And he said, "Well, yeah, yes, they have." He said, "Boy, don't that make you mad?" Is that true?
I never heard
No,
that.
Bob is right, and that people appreciate you coming to that door. Because I've had people even today will say, "I met you one time. You came up my driveway and asked me to vote for you." It really makes an impact.
Well, Bob's district's in the center of the universe.
I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I was teaching one of my classes yesterday, and it came up about door-to-door stuff. And when I was campaigning for student body president, I went door-to-door in the dorms. And a lot of times they'd knock on the door, and they'd think that there was their next door neighbor.
Sure.
And I would open the door, and they would be rolling a joint or something. Is what they'd be doing, and because they thought, and then they'd look up and see me at somebody they didn't know, and just and I told my class I was always worried, but one of those guys was going to get busted right
boy.
after I
Right
left,
after you were
which
there.
and my election would have been over. So you do door to door can be very interesting.
I didn't know how many people had dogs until I went
Yeah,
door to door, and how
you
many
get 'em.
dogs so many people have. Got bit only one time, but that made me a little bit more careful. But
Yeah,
you never know
they-
what you're going to run into.
They get after politicians.
They certainly do.
I-
Alan, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was going to tell, with Alan being here too, this is another story I told yesterday, is that I was running Bart's campaign, and we had some public information, a financial disclosure statement on one of our opponents that we really wanted to get. And I had an intern, and I sent the intern for it, and I told him, I said, don't lie, but if you can get by without having to sign your name, do it. So he goes, he gets the information, he comes back, he's proud of himself, and I said, well, did you sign your name? He says, no, I used another name. I said, what name did you use? He said, yours. Yeah.
That taught you a lesson.
Yeah, I
there, I'm
did.
John, it's made a big difference having television here, besides using the scoreboard and changing the voting pattern. There was a point where when we had committee meetings in the committee rooms, nothing was recorded many times, and certainly TV wasn't in there, and people would be shocked at what was said and the names that were called and how rude 2 or 3 commissioners could be, to the point that I've witnessed several times where one would challenge another to a fight, and they would step outside and just about get into it, and then other commissioners would go out there and break it up. So having TV, making this a pleasant place to be, suddenly brought civility and decency to the commission, although most commissioners were civil and decent anyway, but the ones that weren't had to clean their act up.
And I remember even before that, when we started broadcasting the commission meetings, it had an effect on the performance of many of the individuals, and certainly television even more so with the visibility part.
Well, I can feel this now because it's easy to suddenly try to dominate a conversation. That when we went on TV and here, we had 3 or 4 that would pop up no matter what. They always had to second something. They always had to say something. They always had to say what their opinion was on every issue, and TV does bring that out. So I'll try to be quiet for a little while. I'll revert back to old practice.
And Bob mentioned something too. You know, we can disagree on issues. We can disagree on, you know, different political beliefs. You know, Republicans, Democrats, even Republicans disagree amongst themselves, and even Democrats disagree amongst themselves. But you can do it with civility.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, you know, it's about the political debate, and it's about the exchanging of ideas. And you know, and I'm glad we don't live in a society where basically we all think alike, because that's not a democracy. That's not what we, you know, what we're intended to be as a nation. And so I think it's good to have the banter back and forth, but as long as it's civil,
Sure.
And after it's all over with and the vote goes down, you know, hey, I may have lost some, may have won some, but at least, you know, I got to work harder the next time to try to win that debate or win that vote. But you know, it's, you know, sometimes you say, well, from the right and the left, that the truth somewhere is in the middle, from that standpoint. So, you know, I like having a good, vigorous debate. But once it's over with, you know, we can all work together, because really, Rutherford County, Murfreesboro is what's the most important part of all.
You remind me of one of my favorite stories of President Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House. They would battle each other all day long in the Congress, and I understand President Reagan would have Tip O'Neill over at the White House to play poker at night, and be friends that way.
And got along, and President Reagan was very pragmatic too. I mean, he would compromise and get things done. And a great saying that I really love of his is he says, "Better to get 80% of something than 100% of nothing." So, you know, I thought that was a very good way to put it.
John, there's an element of mystery in being in an elected body. People promise you that they're going to vote a certain way, and then when it comes time to vote and you think that you've got it, somebody changes their mind and it throws the whole thing off, and you lose the issue, whatever it is. I remember on 2 occasions on the end of June, when we were voting for the entire county budget, we thought we had enough votes, and they went around, 2 people changed their mind and didn't vote, and the budget that had been worked on so hard for several months went down. Well, the county executive says time to go to lunch, which meant for those of us that lost, we need to get 2 people to change some way or another. And so we used to go to the workhouse to have lunch.
So always feed the county commission in July.
And of course, a couple of commissioners were pretty close to being permanent members of the workhouse, but that was that was different. Anyway, we worked on those people, and when they came back, we were able to get a motion up and to change it and get it through. But it took the lunch break
To get it done.
to get it done. And on another one, we started to vote, and we found out that we were a vote short, and we got the county executive just to call a brief recess, and about 4 people went out with that person out in the hall, in the old hallway, and they talked out there for a while, and finally they came in and said, "I think we can vote now." And then we were able to get the budget through again.
And that's the way the process works.
I mean, some people say, well, that's crooked or something. It's not crooked. It's you got to have 11 votes, or you don't have anything. And that's the way you have to do it.
50 and 17, the two most important numbers in the legislature.
Yeah.
And John, you can probably tell stories about the caucus elections. I know from some of the state representatives I've talked with that when you're electing your caucus officials, everybody has basically promised everyone goes into that meeting thinking they have the votes, right? Because it's politicians campaigning with other politicians, and it's a secret ballot. Correct.
Right, yeah.
I remember my friends said that people would write with their left hand so that they couldn't trace the. So what were those like?
I don't remember we had too many that were all that exciting in those days, but you're basically correct in what you're saying. We're going to talk about some of the former governors, some of the stories about them. Do we share any of those? Go ahead, Alan. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to mention before we get into that, back talking about working together and kind of trying to, especially in the minority. In 1990, I ran Mike Lyles' campaign for state representative, and he was the first Republican ever elected. And some people we were like aliens that landed. They just really didn't know how to talk to us, and kind of like what you were referring to earlier about the 2 Republican votes. But the key thing was it was right after the 1990 reapportionment, and the legislative districts were being drawn. And of course, at that time, Representative John Bragg, who was chairman of the Finance, Ways and Means Committee and such, and of course, it was kind of what he wanted his district to look like. And so I thought, I was just a college student out here at MTSU, and I thought, I'm going to work this plan here. And so I came up with 3 plans, and I said, this one here basically is the fairness way it should be, just split right down the middle. And I said, now this one here throws the Democrats over here into Lyles' district, from that standpoint. And I said, now this one right here gives you all the Democrats and gives Lyles all the Republicans. And at that time, because the tide wasn't turning, but there was more of us than just a couple around back then. And he looked at me. He said, "Well, I kind of like that one that's got all the Democrats in my district." And I said, "Well, here's kind of what we like, and so if there's a way when you're all working on this that you can kind of shape it and mold it, something like that." But then he asked me. He said, "Have you ever thought about becoming a Democrat?" I said, "No, sir." But that was one good encounter that I had with Representative Bragg. But it was one of those that kind of we got to shape the lines, and we know we got to work within these certain parameters. And we were just trying to make sure we could get what we best of what we could, because it was better to get 80% of nothing.
Yeah, you had learned early that redistricting is probably more about incumbent protection than it is political advantage. And we helped draw the congressional district lines a couple of times, and we figured that out pretty early. Yeah, take care of the incumbents.
You remind me, as growing up, my father was Secretary Treasurer of the Democratic Executive Committee, which was the whole thing as far as elections were concerned, and conducted elections back in those times. But I remember going around the square, he'd say, "Look at there, there's one of the Republicans in the county." So we had 3 prominent Republicans in the county. That was sort of about it, and how that has changed over the years.
Yeah, because now everybody, it's a Republican office holders, and I think there's one countywide Democrat elected. So the tables have really kind of turned.
Well, John, you can vouch for this story if it's true or not, that when General MacArthur came here to visit, because his wife was from Murfreesboro,
Jean Marie Faircloth.
Right, and
April 30th,
of course
1951.
they had a parade and everything, and the city council met, and they were going to name what is now Broad Street General MacArthur Boulevard.
MacArthur Boulevard.
MacArthur Boulevard, and somebody made the motion, and then somebody else said, "Wait just a minute, isn't MacArthur a Republican?" And there was silence in the room, and they sort of nodded yes, and they never finished the motion, and they never
did carry it
They never voted it. I've heard it.
I think it's some
true.
truth to
I
that.
think
Yeah, I think
true.
so.
That is interesting.
Any former governor stories in the time?
I can give you a quick former senator's story.
Right.
I worked part of the time in the Albert Gore Research Center at MTSU, and one of the things that I found was very interesting going through his documents were some letters from 1960. Back and forth between Elmo Roper and George Gallup and Senator Gore, because Senator Gore had kind of been called on by the Kennedy campaign because Kennedy at that time was not doing so well in the polls against Nixon.
Okay.
And they called on him because Senator Gore had been attacking polling for a number of months. He thought it more led public opinion than it did report public opinion. And so and there's some great original material from Roper and Gallup, and in order to prove that polling was a bunch of hocus pocus, he took his staff one Saturday in Washington, and they went door to door doing their own polling. And they put a couple of ringers in both the presidential primaries. They put David Eisenhower on the Republican side, and they put Franklin Roosevelt Jr. on the Democratic side to demonstrate that people would just go for the name. So Senator Gore did a long speech on the Senate floor where he talked about how all the votes these individuals got and how he had proven that polling wasn't scientific, and that he went on to say he wasn't going to give the results because there were a bunch of senators running on both sides. He said, I don't want to embarrass my colleagues. Well, I found his tally sheet, and the irony is that he had successfully picked Kennedy as the Democrat and Nixon as the Republican. Yeah, so he had gotten it all right out when he was out trying to prove it was wrong. Yeah.
Interesting story. In the time remaining, we have a couple more stories.
There's one quick one. Please. They say it's true that when Clement was governor, he was coming back from somewhere, and he had a state trooper driving him, and they went by the Central State, which was the mental institution for the state at that time, and the governor insisted on stopping because the weather was good, and he got out, and a lot of the patients were roaming around on the grounds, and he would go around and say, I'm Frank Clement, governor of Tennessee. It's nice to meet you. And he went on that way for a while, and then an older fellow came up and tapped him on the shoulder, and he says, calm down, young man. Said, when I came here, I thought I was president of the United States.
Good.
Well, this one not as funny as that one, but back in 1994, it was kind of the big Republican sweep of Congress, and of course, a lot of people don't realize that really the first campaign stop for a little known heart surgeon from Nashville, and as Jim Cooper called a Hollywood actor, was right here in Murfreesboro at the Southland Fish Fry, and that was those two made their first official campaign stop in the early spring. I mean, it may have been right at 1st of March. They did that, and of course Bill Frist, nobody knew, nobody really talked to, and got a chance to talk to him, but it was one of those things but it really started, and then their Senate careers went on and had a lot of success, and then of course Senator Frist became Senate Majority Leader, and we always kid some of their folks so that it all started right here in Murfreesboro.
Gentlemen, thank you. This has been fun, sharing your experiences and stories that we've heard and some we've been involved in. We've enjoyed having Dr. Bob Bullen with us today, Ken Syler and Alan Farley, to talk about political stories that we hope that you'll enjoy and be able to relate to others. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us for Murfreesboro Storytellers.